Over the weekend, I ran into two listeners of the program who told me, Nick, you're being too pessimistic. Can we be a little optimistic? On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, an optimist's view of the 2024-2025 Edmonton Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone that's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So, as I said at the intro, today's show, we're going to take the optimist view for the Edmonton Oilers this season, why they're capable of going on a Stanley Cup final run and winning the whole thing this year. We're going to start out with the biggest and most important part. The majority of a championship team is still in place. Number two, each of the teams the Oilers are going to run into over the course of a playoff run have flaws of their own that the Oilers can take advantage of and exploit. And then in our final segment, I'll tie a bow on it by making a very straightforward case that sometimes it's not about the most rational decision or feeling. It's more so about what you can do and when you can do it. So starting out, anytime you enter a season with two, if not three, top 20, 30 players in the entire sport, barring something weird, you are going to be a Stanley Cup contender. Just outright, that is one of the prerequisites. If you are going to be in that conversation, you need to have a certain baseline level of talent. I wrote something for my Substack yesterday where I talked about some of the issues the Rangers are having right now. And one of their defining issues is that they never gave Artemi Panarin another superstar forward to play with. Because you look through the last 15 years of NHL history, other than the St. Louis Blues, every single one of those teams had at least two elite forwards. And we're being a little generous when we include Marian Gaborik with the 2014 LA Kings. We might be being a little bit generous talking about Justin Williams, Mike Richards as the other one, the first time the Kings won. But this is an era defined by superstars. Kane and Taves, Crosby and Malkin, Backstrom and Ovechkin, Barkov and Tkachuk, Eichel and Stone, Steven Stamkos, Nikita Kucherov, Braden Point. Even the teams that haven't won Stanley Cups, but were still competitive in this window, Joe Pavelski, Joe Thornton, Patrice Bergeron, David Pastrnak, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, to be in that conversation, to be a Stanley Cup contender, the minimum entry requisite is two superstar forwards. You need to have at least two guys who are capable of swinging games entirely by themselves. That is the single most essential component that you are going to find. And as we move forward into this new era of the NHL, where the salary cap is going to be less of an issue, there's going to be more liquidity in markets, teams are going to be able to hold on to those middle-class players. And that becomes one of the real challenges teams have to make is it worth tying up our money in these guys who are good when we need a great player? Are we going to see a team be able to channel the aggregate in the way the St. Louis Blues and the LA Kings were? Will a team channel that aggregate and be able to manage it to a degree that they can overcome a more talented team? But in essence, the Oilers are at minimum in this conversation as long as Connor and Leon are on the team. You also have Evan Bouchard, who, look, I know there are a lot of Oiler fans who've been leaving comments telling me you don't know what you're talking about. Bouchard's having a terrible season. Is he as good as last year? No, of course not. He's still one of the 10 to 15 best defensemen in the entire NHL, and that's a very high bar to clear. It's one of the other requisites you need to have. Now, the further you get down the lineup, the more different it is from last year. But your most commonly used forwards from last year's playoffs, for the most part, are still in play here. And that's the key. It's not just have these guys are talented, they're good, what have you. It's that they've been through the wars now. They have experience and they have been there. You look at playoff games last year and you go by average time on ice. McDavid, still on the team. Hyman, still on the team. Draisaitl, still on the team. Nugent-Hopkins, still on the team. Adam Henrique, but we're skipping Evander Kane in there because Evander Kane has yet to play this year, but he will be on the team. Then Ryan McLeod, Warren Fogle, not on the team anymore. But one of the keys to understanding this, the Oilers lineup deployment, especially at the top end, in the playoffs last year, was on the extreme end. Connor McDavid was getting 23 minutes a game. Zach Hyman, 21-25. Draisaitl, 21-24. Nugent-Hopkins, 2019. Big drop-off of Evander Kane down at 14:57. Adam Henrique at 14:06. Then McLeod, Fogle, Mark Brown, Holloway, Perry, all those guys are between 13 and 10 minutes per game. The Oilers can get reasonable production out of the guys in the bottom half of their lineup for 10 minutes a game. Now, I think the Oilers definitely burned the candle a little bit at both ends over the course of that playoff run. And I think by Game 7 of that Stanley Cup final, you saw it with 10 minutes to go that Connor and Leon were definitely a bit gassed. That running the super line out there as frequently as they did in that Game 7 definitely wore them down and maybe didn't give them the best possible chance to pull that comeback off. But when you have players capable of making up that gap, of making up that difference to that degree, where all you need is the occasional depth contribution, that makes it a lot more calculable, a lot more easy to calculate. You think I made up that word, calculable. I don't think that's a word. Fact check me on that. But you think about it. When we're talking about paths to victory, if your superstars can win their minutes and convincingly the way the Oilers guys have for their entire NHL careers, and then you get the occasional chip in. And last year, you don't get me wrong, Zach Hyman, essential, led the team in playoff goals last year, even though he was playing, 4 or 5 minutes less per game than Connor McDavid. Yeah, 21-25 for Hyman, and he had 16 goals in 25 playoff games. The Oilers are going to need someone to pick up that slack somewhere throughout the lineup. Now, whether that's Hyman himself, whether that's an aggregate of Nuge and Jeff Skinner and Adam Henrique, and then Brown and Janmark and maybe Trent Frederick and Evander Kane, those numbers, you can recreate those numbers in the aggregate. You can find a way to extract a little bit more out of your guys. And that's really the beauty of the playoffs. And when you have superstars to the degree the Oilers do, you don't need a whole lot from your depth. I mean, they got to Game 7 of a Stanley Cup final and were within one goal of at least getting to overtime. And once you got past Hyman, Draisaitl, McDavid, Nuge, and Evan Bouchard, every other player on the team had 5 goals or less in the playoffs. Matthias Ekholm and Dylan Holloway had 5 each. Evander Kane, Adam Henrique, Ryan McLeod, Matthias Janmark 4 each. Fogle 3. CC Nurse, Broberg, Connor Brown 2 apiece, and then Kulak and Perry 1 apiece. Those numbers are doable. You can convince me this year's Oilers team can recreate those goal totals in the aggregate. Now, the distribution is probably going to be a little more even. Hyman, I don't expect to have 16 goals in 25 games, but there's enough here that if everything goes right, the Oilers can make something happen. And that's really the key. The Oilers, for all of their regular season issues this year, they still have the capacity to play better, and they have room in front of them. And that's a luxury. That's a privilege. When you are a good team that has more to get out of your guys, that is a cause for optimism. So on that note, we're going to take our first break of today's show. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Oilers' contemporaries in the Western Conference, who they could run into on the path, what their path is going to look like, and a whole lot more on this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. So be sure to stick around. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. I told you guys I didn't watch a ton of regular season college basketball. I rode with my Johnnies as an opportunity to be a New York elitist, and St. John's, of course, lost to Arkansas in the round of 32. But there is still so much to look forward to from the Sweet 16 through the Final Four and crowning a national champion. With tournament games happening every weekend, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when you win, you get paid out instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all March long. Today's show is also brought to you by wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you, unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no-shell variety. They're the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days, whether I'm here at my desk working on the show, in the car on the road, or if I need a quick protein fix to hit my macros for the day, they're a great go-to. Or if you're old school and you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein that provides all 9 essential amino acids. So, get crackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we make the optimist case. And I try to, in all walks of my life, not just sports and in the work I do, I try not to go full doomerist because, and I'll give credit to James Baldwin, the author, the intellectual from the 20th century, who said it, being a pessimist is giving up. And look, I'm going to elaborate. But when you look at life through a pessimistic view, you take the magic out of it, that anything can happen. When you keep the pessimist, doomerist worldview, you render yourself a passenger to life that, well, everything is so bad, it's never going to get better. There's nothing I can do. I am one person in a complicated system. And I understand the nihilist, doomerist streak that a lot of people have in them. Sports really induces it in me personally, but you can't go through life like that. And sports are supposed to be fun. They are supposed to be an experiential hobby that brings you closer to your community, that teaches good values that we're supposed to look at as virtuous, and that they're a reflection of our society and what we prioritize in our social and media endeavors and what we care about and what they say about us as people, a society, a species of as humans. And I really do try to make that even keel case. You know, I very often here on Locked On Oilers will do the glass half full, glass half empty, and then tell you what I think. But I want you guys to have that evidence in front of you. I want you, as the listener, to take both sides of my argument, and whichever side you happen to agree with, that works for me. That's my goal here. I still look at doing this show through a journalistic lens. And the goal of a good journalist is to give their audience actionable information for when they make decisions. Do you want to watch games? Do you want to buy a jersey? Do you want to buy tickets to a game? And in theory, the more informed you are, the better the decision you're going to make as far as that goes. And speaking of how far that goes, we can assume, at least as of right now in the middle of March, the Oilers are likely headed towards a 4th straight first-round matchup against the Los Angeles Kings. Now, can the Oilers beat the Kings for a 4th time? Yes, of course. Is there a little part of me that's worried anecdotally that everything in my life as a sports fan tells you You don't get to keep beating the same team over and over again. That's really a recurring theme of history, that every dog has his day in the sports world, and that for the 100 years the Yankees got over on the Red Sox, the Red Sox did finally get over on the Yankees, and you could argue the 2004 ALCS opened a time warp, and ever since, the Yankees and Red Sox have flipped roles. The Red Sox won in 04, 07, 2012, and then 2018, 2019, whichever one it was when they beat the Dodgers. But, like, you get what I'm saying here. And the Oilers are a more talented team. Of course, the more talented team does not always win. In fact, in the NHL playoffs, the more talented team, the favorite, wins the least of the four major North American sports. There is so much variance that goes into hockey. But supposing you can beat the LA Kings in the first round, your second round opponent is either going to be the Vegas Golden Knights or one of the motley crew that is going to represent the Western Conference as a wild card. Right now, the safe assumption is the Winnipeg Jets will play the lower wild card. They have an 8-point cushion on the Vegas Golden Knights for first in the Western Conference. The Jets, if we started the playoffs today, would play the St. Louis Blues, which would mean the Minnesota Wild would play the Vegas Golden Knights in the first round, and then the Oilers would play the winner of the Golden Knights and the Minnesota Wild. I personally am the most worried about the Vegas Golden Knights in terms of the Oilers' path. And frankly, I think Vegas is the best team in the Western Conference, and a few of my Jet fan friends have given me a bit of flack for that, but Vegas' style of low event hockey driven by superstars with strong fundamental team defense. There's a reason Jack Eichel, in my opinion, was the best player on Team USA in the Four Nations faceoff. I thought he was playing elite 200-foot hockey, and he's the type of player that can balance out Connor or Leon, or if they're together, Eichel can do enough to make their lives difficult, and just enough that's enough. And then Vegas can start to chip away at you through their depth. And Vegas isn't as deep as in years past. They've definitely, as we all know, lost a handful of guys over the years, and that's the price of being competitive. But the Oilers have played Vegas reasonably well this year, the 2-3 times they've played, and Vegas doesn't have a huge talent advantage. I think their defense is a little bit better. I think I trust their goaltending tandem a little bit more. But as we saw last year, I would have argued Vegas was a more talented team than the Dallas Stars last year, and the Stars won, and that's the peril of that low event, tight score, whoever can score that third goal wins the game type of series, where if it only takes one goal, you can score one fluky goal. And then, supposing the Oilers get past LA, and then Minnesota or Vegas, you're looking at whichever of the three-headed monster from the Central, whether that's Colorado, Winnipeg, or Dallas, is left. All three of those teams are very good. I would dare to say all three of those teams are better than the Oilers right now as we sit here. But as the conference finals last year showed, the Oilers are capable of winning a close series against a contemporary that's as good, if not better than them, or deeper than them, I should say. And the Jets, as much as I have enjoyed their story this year, they have a lot of guys on that team. I really love a lot of guys on that team's game. Dylan Sandberg having the year he's having. I'm really happy for Josh Morrissey, someone I've always believed in. Kyle Connor, Nick Ehlers, two guys I've gone to bat for on more than one occasion. And I still, until I see the Jets in a conference final, a cup final, very much like the Leafs, I'm not going to believe it. Dallas, we did this last year. And look, I know Dallas has Mikko Rantanen now, but look down the right side of that defense. Ilya Lyubushkin, Cody Ceci, Matt Dumba. Come on. The Oilers can play with that. They can make that work. And Colorado, as good as Colorado has been, they don't have Rantanen anymore. And their goaltending situation, though it's stabilized, Mackenzie Blackwood's done a reasonable enough job. He doesn't inspire confidence. I don't feel good about the Avalanche's goaltending situation. How many times before the Avalanche won the Stanley Cup did their goaltending undo them in the playoffs? All it takes is two bad bounces and your goalie's in his own head, and all of a sudden, that's all I'm saying, man. I can make a case for and against every single one of these teams, And at the end of the day, the Oilers are the only team in the West that has 2 top 10 players in the entire sport up front. The Avalanche get to say we have McKinnon and Makar. Those are definitely 2 top 10 players, but they're not both forwards, and the Oilers' 2 best players are. That makes a difference. We are going to take one more break on today's show. When we come back, I will give you the best case scenario, laying out this path to a Stanley Cup, and why, if you're optimistic, it's not that crazy. There's nothing like watching basketball live. The energy of the crowd, the sound of the sneakers on the hardwood, maybe even a celebrity sighting courtside. If you want to catch a game in person, Gametime makes getting tickets easier than ever. Gametime's new feature, Gametime Picks, filters out all of the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats. That way, you don't have to waste time scrolling through thousands of tickets. Whenever I am going to a game, and I bring up the subject in the group chat, I'm always the one who gets the tickets because I know where to find the best deal, and I always hit up Gametime for the super deal, which gives me the best bang for my buck. My favorite part about the Gametime ticket buying experience is the peace of mind. With seat views before you buy, no surprise fees at checkout, and the lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we're being optimistic today. And every now and then, it's good to get feedback like that, because I generally try, like I said, to give that middle ground, to give you the best and worst case scenario. That way you got all the tools, and it's on you to make the decision. Because I don't like telling people what to think in that capacity, because we can look at evidence differently. Now, there are some things where the evidence is indisputable and people will still misinterpret what you're arguing. And at that point, you have 2 options. You can try and be amenable and find whatever the misunderstanding is that is making the conversation have that tenor. Or B, you can assume this person is arguing in bad faith or doesn't really know what they're talking about. And because of that, you are wasting your time by trying to reason with them. Ultimately, it's upon you, your patience as a person, how much you care, frankly. Some people just don't, and there's some merit to that. But the case for the Oilers is very simple. This team went to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final last year and lost by a single goal to one of the best playoff teams of the last 5-10 years in that specific iteration of the Florida Panthers. The Oilers will have a doable first-round matchup that they are capable of winning in 5 or 6 games, which is an absolutely imperative component of going on a deep playoff run. Your first round needs to be a quick series. You cannot accumulate wear and tear going 6 or 7 against a team you have a discernible talent advantage against, like the Oilers do against the Kings. And from there, we start getting into the, well, this team is almost, if not as good, if not better than us tier of the postseason, which is typically what happens when we cut the field from 16 down to 8. We're usually looking at division winners. Wildcard teams don't typically fare all of that well, barring the occasional miracle run. And because of that, we get really good matchups in what could be later in the playoffs. And look, is there an argument to be had that we should go back to the 1-8 format, because the way we have it set up right now with the divisional preference and looking for those division matchups in the playoffs, it's kind of unfair that the Avalanche and Stars are going to have to play each other in the first round, and those are arguably the 2nd and 3rd or 3rd and 4th. At worst, the 4th and 5th best teams in the entire conference, and they're going to play in the first rounds. That just feels a little unfair. And if you're the Oilers, you're happy your path won't include both of those teams. They will only include one. And then you worry about what happens in the conference final, whether that's a wild card team, whether that's the Jets. And because of that, you can talk yourself into this path being workable and the Oilers having a little more juice to squeeze. And that's really one of those double-edged swords, because when you spend the entire season thinking to yourself, they're playing okay, but I think they have more to give, it really can be tantalizing that you talk yourself into it from a high ceiling perspective that, well, if they're playing only okay or good and they're still finding ways to win, what happens when they get to great? If they get to great, then we're really talking about something special here. And that transformation usually happens midway through the second round of a playoff series, because that's where you really start to get some hair on your chest, and you really start to forge who you are going to be. And you think about the attrition and the calcification that happens over the course of just a playoff run, let alone the entire season. You've spent the last 7 months just to get to game one of the first round. We're talking the second week of September, you got up to Edmonton for captains' informal workouts. You did preseason testing, preseason games. You played from October through the middle of April. Now we are in a first round playoff series. We've played good enough to get here. The bar gets higher with each passing round. And that's not just in terms of the talent of the opposition. That's also in terms of the expectations, because the further you go, the higher the stakes, the more each game means, and the more the onus is on you as a player and as a coaching staff to seize that opportunity. And that's what I'll leave you with as a parting thought. I spent so much time in the aftermath of losing Game 7 talking about how you're going to remember moments from that playoff run for the rest of your life. You are going to remember that feeling of them beating the Stars. You are going to remember that feeling of, oh my God, we're going to a Game 7 after the way the first 3 games of this series went. We're going to a Game 7 after starting Calvin Pickard twice in a playoff series. There are moments you will remember for the rest of your life that happened last year. That's how much this means to you. The Oilers didn't win the Stanley Cup. Sure, they won the conference. It's a nice accomplishment. First time in 20 years. You feel good about that. But that's not your goal. You're not playing for conferences, for President's trophies, for Harts, for Ted Lindsays, for Norrises, for Vezinas, for Calders. You are playing for the best trophy in all of professional sports, and it demands your very best. And to get there, you need to be at your very best. That will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening over on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, join the conversation down in the comments. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.